Podcast. I'm a big film nerd, Everett.
And I'm Emerald, and I'm engaged to a nerd.
On this week's episode, we'll be covering two movies.
The Last Voyage of the Demeter, directed by Andre Overdahl.
And Godland, directed by Hilner Palmason. For both of these movies, we will start with non-spoilers and then go into spoilers. Time codes for both of those will be down below. Let's get into it.
The Demeter, on charter from Romania to London. Shipping private crates. Contents unknown. Out at sea with no land in sight.
Okay. For my pick this week, I chose The Last Voyage of the Demeter, directed by Andre Overdahl. I chose this because it is a new imagining of Dracula, basically based off of one chapter of the original book. It was supposed to be a scary movie. I thought it would be like a little fun, jump scary, cheesy type movie. It was not. It takes place on the Demeter, a boat, and as it states, it is the last voyage of said boat, as they are hauling a coffin with a vampire inside. That's it. That's the movie. And it's not good.
Yeah. It is as simple as it sounds. Dracula is on a boat. People will die. And they don't then twist that at all. Like, there's nothing about it that sets this beyond the simple premise. I think they think it does. They're trying to be super dramatic and deep, and they're not. And so, yeah, I think the best thing I can say about this movie is it's competent, and that it doesn't look bad. It's not, the production quality is good. The cast, it's an entire cast of, I've seen them in something. Oh, they've been in that one thing I know. None of them are huge stars, but they're all very good. And it's just, there's nothing special about this movie.
Yeah, I would definitely wait for streaming. I would also wait for streaming not only because it's not worth the money, but because I would have needed closed captions. Because every single cast member has different accents, and they're all kind of mumbly because they're pirates. Not pirates, but they're like ship workers, and it's like loud because they're on the ocean, and I really had a hard time.
Yeah, when you've got like a Romanian and a Russian yelling at each other in the middle of a storm, it can be a little about things that are not like common like ship terminology, and individual languages are like coming through slightly, like some terms around Dracula and stuff are being used in their original languages, and it's
But
confusing.
Luckily with this movie, 90% of it is just them yelling their names back and forth at each other, so there's really not a lot to understand. I caught onto it about 30-40 minutes into the movie. I was like, wow, they're just yelling each other's names a whole lot in this. And then once I kind of clued into that, I was almost... Sorry if you can hear our cat. I feel like we end up saying that almost every week. Yeah, he just decides to scream anytime we start recording because we're not giving him attention, so I'm sorry.
But yeah, it almost becomes distracting and laughable how much of the movie they assume any noise, despite all of the stuff that's been happening, must just be their friend playing a prank on me. Oh, that must be so-and-so. And so they just yell their name and walk around the boat slowly until they come across Dracula.
Yeah. It's just not good. I wish they would have, him and I both wish they would have just not showed Dracula the whole time and just had like slight glimpses where you're like, oh, well, maybe that could be him or maybe not, like behind the sails or something. It's such a good set to have like a mysterious monster that you're not quite sure if it's there or not. And yes, the monster looked good for the most part, but they overused it to the point that it was just not
It was just another character to the point where, like, it's walking out of a shadow, and I'm like, yep, there he is again. And then 2 minutes later, oh, there he is, walking around again. Oh, there he is, climbing down this. Oh, there he is, biting this person.
Yeah, if Everett would have directed it, he would have made it a psychological thriller where you couldn't tell if the monster was real or not, and I think that would have also been just a way better way to take it, because he was way overused.
Yeah, I think you've got a great setup of there's a supernatural creature that nobody, except for one character who's a woman who is there for reasons we'll get into in spoilers, but she's the only one who kind of knows what this creature is. Everybody else has their superstitions, or they're trying to rationalize it with the real world, all of this kind of stuff. And so you've got a very fraught, tense situation where everybody's stuck in a small, close quarters world together for 4 weeks, and there is something slowly killing them off. And that is a great setup to really delve into the psychology and the fear and the distrust between each other, a la like a Lighthouse, It Comes at Night, Hereditary. And instead, it just goes a very generic, boring route. And it's not even like they end up just doing lots of jump scares or lots of gore. It's not overly gory for what it is. It's very minimal on jump scares or, loud sound, sudden burst type stuff. It doesn't have a lot of psychological tension or fear. I don't really ever feel peril. Even also, right in the first moment of the film, this might be considered a very slight spoiler, but the literal first scene of the movie is the end of the movie, so you pretty much know the outcome, and so you know what's going to happen on this ship. And again, it's Dracula on a ship. Obviously, a lot of people aren't going to make it, but it made me never get
root for
attached.
any of them, because but that's the other thing, is like they had the perfect setup to do this like psychological evaluation of the characters, because there is the girl who knows what it is. There's a very religious man on the ship who thinks it could be like the devil. There's like a guy who's super superstitious, and then there's a doctor who only believes in science, who is like convinced there's a reasonable explanation for this.
Yeah, there's the first mate who doesn't care what it is. He's going to get, we've got a job to do and we're going to get here. We have a captain who has his grandson on board, and it's going to be his last voyage no matter what happens on it. And they also, I think, did a very good job. If they got the cargo to England by a certain day, they would get bonus pay, so it establishes why they never dock again, or like why when things start to go wrong, they don't just immediately dock. They're about to make bank if they can get to England just 2 days sooner or whatever. Going to port will cost them those 2 days, so they don't want to do it. And so at the start, when things start going wrong, you're like, oh, you should just dock and assess and evaluate what's going on. But they all want to be rich.
And at that point, they're not entirely sure if anything's happening. So it makes sense why they don't.
Yeah, and so I think it does a good job of setting up the potential for why they're not. And then again, you could have had a split and between the crew of those who are like, no, I want my money, and those who are like, I don't care how much you pay me, I don't want to be on this ship anymore. Yeah. And that could have set up some interesting tension between characters. But they all seem relatively on the same page. Even when they have wildly different worldviews, they all go, yeah, okay, we'll do this. Yeah, okay, we'll all work together and figure this out. And it's like, that's nice. Glad people are getting along, but that leaves no tension in the movie.
It was just very boring.
Yeah. So I think that's about all we got to say.
We'll move into spoilers now. All right, so moving into spoilers, The Last Voyage of the Demeter, it opens up with the Demeter washing up on the London shore, and nobody is in the boat, and if they are in the boat, I'm guessing they're dead, because there's people like throwing up and freaking out and whatever when they find it, but they're like, there's no survivors.
Which immediately to me was a red flag for this movie, because two things. One, now we know, and again, it was pretty obvious pretty much everyone was going to die, but we knew, like, 100% everyone was going to die, and it wasn't even like they tease, oh, so-and-so's going to survive, and you're like, oh my gosh, how do they get out of this situation? And as it unfolds, you can't believe they're going to make it, and then they do. It doesn't do that, even though a character does survive. And then,
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. And so you just assume everyone's going to die or whatever. And then also it sets up the idea like, oh, this, a character literally says like, I won't go back on there. It's the worst thing I've ever seen. And I'm like, okay, you're going to have to really do some violent, gross gore. And then literally nothing worse than someone getting a neck bit happens. Yeah. Like, it's a gory neck bite. And I mean,
that one guy who gets his nose sliced in the door is kind of rough.
Yeah.
He's not on the ship anymore. They throw him over. He burns to death, and then they throw him over.
So, yeah. And, like, I get that for that guy, I personally would not want to go back on that ship if I was, a British guy back then or whatever. I would also be saying to the constable, no, you can't make me go back in there. It's so gross and disturbing. But in the realm of a horror movie, some holes in people's necks.
And also back then, they watched decapitations and hangings for fun. Like, it's back when, like, public punishment was a real thing. That's not in the movie. I'm just, like, if you've seen a decapitation, having a little neck bite isn't the worst thing you've seen.
Yeah, and a lot of the characters who do have the gory moments of their death are either at the bottom of the ocean or burned up skeletons.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of, there's no Dracula rips heads off and they're hanging from the ceiling and a guy's caught in the, ropes of the ship with his bowels dripping down.
Yeah, they had a moment that they could have done something with someone hanging from, like, the sails or whatever, and then because there's like blood dripping down on this kid's face, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be so gross, and the music swells and they look up and he just has like a little baby neck bite, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, so again, you're not willing to go beyond Dracula just bites people in the neck for efficiency, and so you're not going to deliver on the over-the-top gore or violence that makes it a horror movie. And so you needed to lean into the psychological, and they just don't. Especially
because when they very first introduced Dracula and you actually see him, he's, like, very weak and can't stand up, really. And he's, like, licking the blood off the floor and stuff. So you'd think they do... Like, he could have been so cool. It's just a bummer with what they did. But anyways, they're in this ship. Some of their crew quits or whatever because there's a symbol that's a bad omen on one of the boxes that's like a dragon, and so this other doctor guy gets to go on board and get back to London, which is where he wanted to go anyways. The first night or second night there, they find a woman in one of the boxes who's like dying, and immediately he's like, she needs a blood transfusion, and starts pumping his own blood into her. No question on their blood type, nothing, just Jimmy jamming that in there and pumping his own blood into her.
Yeah, I wonder if there was a draft of this script in which, instead of going the direction they did in the end, he was a doctor who was so essentially he's African descent, black-skinned, and managed to be one of the first or the first to graduate from Cambridge as a doctor, and then nobody would hire him because of the color of his skin. And so he ends up in the backwater of Romania trying to find a job, whatever, and ends up on this ship. And the way he acts, the reckless nature of, blood transfusion and denying any supernatural stuff and whatever, I thought his character's arc was going to be something along the lines of, like, he's so driven to prove himself that he's going to end up costing someone's life because, like, he's going to do something like a blood transfusion and end up poisoning someone, or he's going to be so convinced he can save someone that he's going to try and keep them alive, and then they're going to start killing more people because they've started to turn into a vampire. But in the end, he's just a hero all the way through, and he gives lots of lengthy speeches about either hating God
he has
or...
to understand the world and he's not religious and God's not real and mankind needs to look at him and
and so
stupid.
Yeah, or like he goes off, one guy's basically just like, are we sure we can do this or something, and then he literally just yells for 2 minutes about racism, and I was like, again, racism is bad, I'm not saying it's not, but like we could have handled this with a little more tact and nuance and development beyond just a man yelling racism is bad on a ship.
So the girl gets kind of better. She tells them that Dracula's on board, except for she never says that. She just says, he's here, and they are supposed to apparently know what that means. At the beginning, she spoke no English, but by the end, she only speaks English. There's a little kid on the boat. His dog gets eaten, which is rude, because the dog was very cute. All the livestock gets killed. One by one, all of the people get killed. There's more ranting about God. Also, the poor captain of this ship, his grandson gets bit by the vampire, slowly starts to turn into a vampire. They decide he's dead, so they go to throw him overboard, and he's like, no, he's alive, he's moving. So they unwrap his body and he bursts into flames and gives the captain 3rd-degree burns. So he just locks himself away in his captain's quarters, and then he's like, oh, I'll just steer the ship out into sea and you guys can escape. But for some reason they just don't go with that plan, and then they never show him again. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Like, when all the drama goes down and everyone's dying, they just never show him again. And it's just so much wasted potential in this movie. And then at the end, they kind of try and do this weird love story between the doctor guy and the Romanian girl.
It was laughable.
It
came out of nowhere.
Awful. And, like, they're, like, holding hands and, like, we are together. And she's like, I've never got to choose anything in my life. I get to choose to die now. And then she takes the only floating board with a seat instead of him having to dangle in the water for days trying to get to London, and burns to death in the sun. And they all burn to death in the sun. And they know that the vampires burn to death in the sun, and they know where the vampire sleeps. So they could have just brought his coffin upstairs, opened it, and he would have died. But they're stupid and didn't. They also had lifeboats the whole time. Nobody took one. The one guy tried and then got eaten, but he also tried at night because that's stupid. And then he's sitting in a bar and at the end, and Dracula's there in a top hat, even though he still looks like a weird bat monster creature. And then he like chases him out, giving this long dramatic speech about how there's going to be a sequel to the movie, basically, and he's going to hunt him down till the end of time or whatever. And that could have also been something so cool, because like you see when it shows the coffin that he has this like cane. And the woman talks about how Dracula can disguise himself to look like a regular man. And so at the end, they could have had him look normal and not like obviously a vampire in this bar or whatever, and had his like suspicions rise or something. And he has to convince all of London that this is not a normal man who just bought this manor. It's like Dracula, but yeah, they don't. And it's so bad.
Yep. Yeah, it never comes together. It never does anything interesting or unpredictable or
gory or suspenseful. It's not a horror. It's not a thriller. It's not an action. It's not
a drama. It's
literally the trailer,
piece.
But longer.
Yeah.
Just watch the trailer if you're interested. That's all you need to know.
Yeah. So, what would you rate this one out of 10?
A 2, maybe? Maybe a 3.
Yeah, I was going to go a little nicer and give it a 3 or a 4. I think it's, again, like, competently made. The set looks great. The monster looks great. The actors are good. It's just a poor, underdeveloped script that's trying too hard to set up sequels and play everything safe, and just doesn't come together. But its biggest sin is just that it's really boring and not an interesting movie by any regard.
Yep.
So I will, yeah. Did I say what I was going to give it?
Yeah, 3 or 4.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Moving on.
Evil is on board. Powerful evil.
We call him Dracula.
All right, my movie this week was Godland. It is a Danish movie from this year, and basically the premise is a Danish priest journeys to Iceland and decides he wants to go across the countryside to photograph its land and its people on his way to his final destination. And along the way, he starts to go a little crazy.
Yeah.
And I think the strongest part of this movie is the visuals.
Yeah, I mean, it's
beautiful.
Iceland, it's beautiful. Yeah.
It's a beautiful landscape. They go way out into the countryside. It's shot. So basically, they're also in real history. They found these 7 prints of photos taken by a priest in Iceland, or a Danish priest in Iceland, that inspired this movie. And so the whole way through, he's carrying his camera gear and taking pictures at different points. And they represent these images that they found in real life. And so the whole movie is in the framing size of old photographs, and even has like slightly rounded corners and a little like grain and stuff. So it like looks like an old photograph, just in brilliant, vibrant color.
I do wish they would have showed the original photos.
Yes. Yeah, they never actually go and show you those, which was, I think there is a point where they show, like, I think it is all 7 photos he took, the character, but they don't put them side by side or show you the
and there's also
photos.
There's also a plot hole in that, if that's the case, which we'll go into during spoilers.
But yeah, so it is a beautiful, stunning to look at movie. It is very slow as they literally just walk across Iceland. And I think I like the themes, I like the story on paper, and I think there are some very interesting moments, but it never capitalizes. And there's one main issue is the character only speaks Danish, and most of the people around him only speak Icelandic. And so there's never scenes where they can have a chance for the character to really talk and develop what's happening, because the visuals are quite ambiguous about what is happening in a lot of ways. There is one moment where we see him praying in his tent, and I was like, yeah, give me more of this so I can understand him. And they only did it once or maybe twice. And so you don't end up inside his head enough when he goes crazy to really get what this movie's trying to say.
Which is a bummer, because it really did hold my attention. And
Which is shocking.
Yeah, I don't like slow movies like this. And I was like really waiting for it to bring it home, and then it was just like disappointing. And not in the way that like they didn't, I don't even know how to explain it. Like, they did what they set out to do.
It's on the, like, the movie feels the whole time like it's on the tip of your tongue. Like, oh, this is, it's coming. Hold on. Just, oh, you can see it. It's starting to twist. It's turning. It's coming. This is going to be the moment. And then it keeps sitting on that edge of becoming truly a masterful piece of cinema. Like, it is a stunning movie to look at, and the acting I think is actually really good in this. I think everyone's really strong, the performances, but again, it's
something missing.
Yeah, there's just not enough understanding who the main characters are and their journey beyond the physical walking across Iceland.
Yeah. And
so that falls short. However, there are some adorable dogs, and now I want an Icelandic sheepdog for ourselves, and some really cute little kids.
Yeah.
So if you're into, cute dogs and cute kids, this movie's got that.
I mean, not enough of it to be worth the whole time. It's like almost good for me. Like, I don't even know. I wouldn't recommend it to someone. But
yeah, I probably wouldn't.
I want to. I wish I could, but there's just something missing.
Yeah, these are the types of movies when I saw this, all I saw was it was receiving really good reviews. It was about a Danish priest in Iceland, and that's supposed to be cinematically gorgeous. And I was like, cool,
I'm loves
sold.
Iceland.
I do love Iceland. I also love Denmark, 2 of my favorite places I've been. I say that with everywhere I've been, though.
Yeah.
But I do really, particularly Iceland, I love it there. And so I was super excited for this, and these are also some of my favorite types of movies, are these grand, sweeping, visually stunning mood pieces that just seem to be about nothing but tell you the most profound things about the world. And this movie just doesn't deliver on its setup. And it's really disappointing because I really wanted to love this one.
Yep.
But I think that's all we've got for no spoilers. Let's head into spoilers. Alright, spoilers for Godland. Right off the bat, our priest has a conversation with his head priest person, and they're talking about his journey to Iceland. And he's like, yeah, and beware, there is a volcano that's erupted, and it smells so horribly strong that it makes people go crazy. And then the whole way through the movie, you see this volcanic eruption. The sky is really bright, or there's smoke rising off the horizon. You can see that it's there. And I think it's supposed to be pervasive enough that that's what's turning him crazy.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, but that's the issue. He quote unquote goes crazy, but it really...
He's just kind of a jerk.
He's a little bit of a jerk, and then he turns into a violent jerk, and then it's over. And so there's never... I really thought this was going to be a psychological movie of this man trapped in a country where he doesn't speak the language. He's way out in the middle of nowhere. He's being turned crazy by volcanic smells, and he's going to go insane. And he never really does. He ends up making it to his destination. Not safely, because he does end up really ill, and then they revive him
and carry him there, basically.
Yeah, and revive him, and he's fine, and then they build his church, and he's fine.
And that's one of the things that makes me the most angry about this movie, is that, the leader of the Icelandic people who are leading him there, he literally, is trying to explain how he can safely maneuver his horse, how he can do all this stuff. And, the guy just, doesn't... Obviously, he doesn't understand the language because his translator dies in a river. But, the guy is trying, and he gets a little frustrated because, he's trying to lead someone who doesn't speak the language across an entire country on horseback. And he gets a little frustrated, whatever, but he's still very helpful and really trying to get this guy to where he needs to go, and helps build this church, plays music at a wedding, whatever, isn't that much of a jerk this whole time. And the priest just hates him, and all he asks for is for the priest to take his photo. And the priest, screams at him and says that he doesn't want... him. Yeah, and kills him. And is like, I don't want your ugly face on my camera. How stupid do you have to be? All this stuff. And is like... And that guy's so nice. I mean, he did kill that other guy's horse, but it was his own horse. I just... Yeah,
and that is never fully set up. I think that was in the priest's mind that he killed the horse, because it changes shot to be... It's being shot like a normal conversation, and then it goes completely front square on, which is slightly more like POV of the priest, or just breaks the mold of this conversation, and then he goes, I killed your horse, and then it's never talked about again. So I think that's supposed to be one of those moments the priest is going crazy and he believes this man killed his horse, but in reality we've learned he doesn't like to close the horse pen. He's constantly leaving it open. He loses the girl's horse when he goes to the water. He's always not taking care of his horse.
He's just the worst, and he's mean, and also he has premarital sex with a girl who, I don't know how young she is. She seems to be around his age, but she still lives with her father, and her father's very protective of her. And the priest sleeps with her, which seems frowned upon.
Yeah.
While you're building a church, but probably. Okay.
Yeah, I think I think the reason also he has like that outburst, you do see it. The family he ends up staying with in the community where he builds the church is also Danish and has moved to Iceland. And there's very clear Danish racism towards the Icelandic people there. He believes them to be superior, and like the dad of the family, literally the poor Iceland guy, spills his wine accidentally, and he's like, oh, what do you expect? You invite an Icelander into your house and they're going to, you know, drink your wine and spill the rest of it. They're just animals, basically. And so the priest also kind of believes this to be true. But again, in vein with everything we've been saying, it's not fully developed, the racial tension and the, you know, difference between the two cultures, that it's there if you want to look for it, and there's a couple moments where it's very like apparent, but it doesn't. I wouldn't say this is a movie about cultures colliding and racism, and it just... Yeah,
it really hurt my feelings, because the poor little Icelandic guy, like, he's wants so to nice. Learn how to be a man of God. He wants to learn how to be forgiven in the eyes of God. And, like, the priest won't help him, which is, like, that's literally your whole job. Your entire job is to teach people about religion, and you're just going to say he doesn't deserve God in his life? And, like, then later on, he just wants his photo taken. He says no, he calls him ugly, whatever. Like, it's just upsetting. Like, he really is trying to learn and be nice and be helpful, and he's just murdered for it.
Yeah. I think for me, and maybe it wouldn't, but I think there's like one small, or like two small things that if you change these two things, this movie would achieve its potential. And that is, throughout the whole thing, the Icelandic man, Ragnar, is telling stories, constantly singing songs, telling stories, and they are tangentially related to what is happening and develop stuff, but there should have been a story about, there's some guy, you know, cocky foreigner, comes to the country, dies out in the countryside because he doesn't understand how to survive in Iceland, and he's not accepting help from the locals or something. A little less on the nose, a little more poetically said, because it's well written, blah, blah, blah. But something to that effect that puts that in our mind, that the Icelanders do believe their country is harsh and rugged and that it will eat up anyone who doesn't respect it. The priest this whole time is walking through not respecting it. He's slowly becoming ill. He's going insane. The countryside and journeying through it is beating him up. We then get to the end of the movie and he kills Ragnar, and then instead of fleeing and being... like later, well after he's killed him, and just having a bit of a mental breakdown and deciding to ride off and then getting stabbed by the Danish father, he should have been claimed by the nature, and, you know, they go and they find him, you know, on the cliffside frozen or something, and that's, or just out in a field. He didn't make it because he decided to just try and wander back on his own because he's an arrogant man who doesn't respect Iceland, and then he dies.
Yeah, especially because, like, they have to cross this big river at the beginning, and Ragnar, the leader, is like, we shouldn't do this. It's not safe. We should go back, get our horses hay, and come back in 2 days and cross the river. And the priest goes, no, we're doing this right now. And then his translator dies in the river because it wasn't safe to cross. And they never bring up the fact that, like, hey, he died and it's your fault, you know? Or, like, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, I do think if he just died because of his nature and Iceland beating him because of his arrogance, this then very much does become a movie about cultures coming in and being, like, colonizing places and not respecting the locals. Yeah, because the dad murdering him
doesn't fit. It's just random.
Yeah. It's almost just like he puts him down because he's a sick dog. And he's like, oh, I think you're sleeping with my daughter. I don't like that. And you're clearly going insane and you're going to hurt this community. It's best that I just kill you out here in a field and let everyone think you did die naturally.
Because I liked, the church was finally built and he finally gets to give his first, like, sermon. And, it's right after he murders Ragnar, and he's obviously crazy, and he's in there, and Ragnar's dog starts barking like crazy right outside the door, and you can tell it's just bothering him and bothering him and bothering him. But then like a baby starts fussing inside, and you can tell it's only bothering him because he wants to be the only one talking. And so like that kind of bothers me, because I thought it was gonna like lean into him literally going crazy and realizing he actively murdered someone.
Yeah.
But then he just walks away, gets on a horse.
Yeah, maybe that
and leaves,
if the baby is from an Icelandic side of the community, then I'm okay with that disturbing him. But again, I don't know.
Yeah.
The other issue, which isn't necessarily an issue, but a mild frustration for watching this as an English viewer. Icelandic and Danish are both Scandinavian languages, very much rooted. They have many similar words, and they sound very similar. And it's hard to tell when a character, especially a background character, is speaking one or the other, or they often flip between the two, and the subtitles didn't specify in Danish and then what they're saying in Icelandic, what they're saying. So sometimes, like, Ragnar does end up revealing he does speak a decent amount of Danish, he just doesn't like to.
Because in Iceland, they do Danish Sundays and speak Danish on Sunday.
Yeah. But he doesn't like this tradition or whatever. But so, like, he then does speak a little bit of Danish at the end of the movie, but it might as well have been him still speaking Icelandic as far as we know, or, you know, these members of the community are talking to each other. I don't know. Are they speaking Danish? Are they speaking Icelandic? What side of the community are they on? And so,
yeah, especially
I do wonder.
At the beginning, they do the title in Danish and then the title in Icelandic, so they should have specified with the languages.
Yeah, and so I wonder if I spoke Scandinavian languages better, or one of the two, and could I easily identify which was which, if I would get a slightly better appreciation of this movie, because I would kind of understand sort of like where cultural allegiances lie in the community at the end, which was very unclear. I knew the head guy was Danish, and I knew Ragnar was Icelandic, and everyone else could have been either.
Yeah.
And that made it hard to fully understand the movie. So there is a caveat. Maybe it is better than
yeah,
or more developed than I'm giving it credit for, but it was hard to tell in the English release.
Yeah, so what would you rate it?
Oh, I want to give it such a high score, but my heart wants to give it like an 8 or a 9, but I think realistically it's a 7.
Yeah, I would say 6.5, 7, because I wanted so badly for it to be good, because it's so beautiful and the setup on paper is so good. It just doesn't have that landing that we needed for it to be phenomenal. So I would give it a 6.5, 7.
Yeah, and a little behind the scenes, I didn't tell her what movie I was picking till like the day of, because I was so nervous she would look it up and then not be interested, because this on paper is not her type of movie. So I'm very happy that you gave it that high a score. I think I'm rubbing off on you.
Shut up.
De har fundet en deroppe, som kan føre jer sikkert frem. Og de siger, at folk derfra, de har flere hundrede års erfaring med vejret, floderne og gletsjerne.
All right, thank you for listening to this week's episode. Make sure you follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Nerd and Normie, and tune in every Monday for a new episode.
And if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe. And if you're on audio platform, please give us a 5-star review. It really helps us out.
Thank you.